Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Welcome to Summer Breeze Summer 2021. My name is Roberta Schotka, and I'm the CRLA Certifications Director. I work closely with Sean and Samantha in IT-TPC and Ashley and Mike in IP-TPC. And we're delighted to have you here with us today. And we're so happy to have Cheryl, one of the IT-TPC reviewers here. So as I said a few minutes ago, you're going to be doing some work today. You might want to grab a paper and pen, the old-fashioned way of keeping track of things, to write some things down. You will be doing some work in the chat. You may also be in some breakout rooms if time permits. So we're going to be talking today about starting or restarting a tutor or peer educator program. So the goals for today, we're going to be looking at how do you prepare for success. We're going to look at the ways that CRLA can help you. And then you're going to have some opportunity to roll out a pilot project plan for the future. And then we've got some action items, some takeaways that you can use, that you glean from this session today to use when you're either starting or restarting your own program at your own institution. Okay. First, we're going to be looking at today is the challenge that you're facing. So take a moment to read that, if you will. Okay, has anybody by show of hands or a response in the chat faced a situation similar to this, where you've been asked to create a program to address a specific problem at your institution? Okay, so let's see what we can do to address that problem and how CRLA can help, and the more information about this will follow. So the first thing that we recommend is you learn from all of your stakeholders. Identify who those stakeholders are and then learn as much as you can from them. So we're going to have our first exercise. And Sean, I'd like, if you can, to put everybody into some breakout rooms. But if you would look at the questions first and maybe jot down just the key phrases. You're going to create several questions to ask each of these stakeholders that will help you understand the scope and nature of the problem. And essentially, you want to talk to the faculty to find out what the issues are in the classroom. You want to have focus groups and talk to students to find out what they perceive as the issues. You want to talk about current and former peer educators and or tutors. And you want to meet with other administrators besides the one that gave you the challenge, or the ones that gave you the challenge, to meet with other administrators from both the academic and the administrative areas of the institution to find out what they see as the problem. So all you know right now is there's a problem with retention in chemistry major, okay? So you've got 4 different groups that you're going to pose several questions to. And then as the second part of your task, you're going to decide if there's anyone else you need to consult and what you hope to learn from them. Okay, is there anybody that's not clear about this task, this exercise? And I think you'll have about 5 minutes to do this, working in small groups. And I'll leave this up if you need to come back and check on what the specific task is for now. So good luck. We'll like one person to at least jot down what your responses are. And if time permits, we'll do some quick reporting back to the larger group. So remember, the goal here is to learn as much as you can from the stakeholders by the questions you're asking them. Okay, Sean. Okay, so let's hear briefly from just 1 or 2 groups.
Our group wanted to find out from like the registrar's office when students were leaving the program. At what point is there a bottleneck course, or are they getting through part of the program before they're leaving the chemistry program? So where's the retention problem exist, to help kind of narrow down the kinds of questions and where we might seek answers depending on where the students are running in trouble.
Okay, excellent, excellent. How about something from another group?
Our group thought maybe contacting students to see why they're leaving that program might be helpful, to see if it's like the content is too hard or if the instructors aren't doing, you know, what they expect them to do. Along with that, contacting the instructors to see how they're teaching the material, what their expectations for the courses are might be helpful as well.
Okay, very good. Okay, we have time to hear from one more group and then we'll move on.
Our group talked about asking the faculty what resources were available for students, because if faculty aren't aware of the resources, they can't tell students about them. So that's one that we had.
Okay, very good. Excellent responses. So for this one, I would just like you to put your responses in the chat. So what additional information do you need to help you design and develop a support program that addresses the challenge? You've gotten the challenge from senior staff. You've asked them some excellent questions of the different groups on campus. What else do you need to know, and where can you find this information? Let's assume that this is information that you won't be able to get directly from speaking to somebody. What kinds of information would be helpful, and where might you find it? Where could you find this information? Think about some of the printed documents that institutions create. So Megan, would the catalog tell you why students are not succeeding? Ah, okay, that's great. Yeah, Jean, that's very true. Okay.
Yeah, I love Colin's thing there about context and history, you know, what has been done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our courses are set up with lecture and recitation sections. And so we've always asked ourselves, why do they do that? What's the historical precedent?
Things I'm thinking of is institutional strategic planning documents and accreditation reports. Checking to see what is being done in other departments. Also looking at your cohort institutions. Every institution compares itself to like institutions to see how their students are doing in similar courses. Okay, so you're getting the point being that not only do you need to check with what your different constituents at your campus are telling you, but you also need to see what's written, what various reports, both institutional and regional and national, will tell you about students taking similar courses at other institutions. Okay, excellent. Sean, let's move.
I want to interrupt you and just say, you know, the reason that this is so important to do is because you want to go in designing something that meets the need. So, you know, you might have an administrator that comes to you and says, this course needs more tutoring because students are failing it. But when you actually look at the data, you realize, oh, well, like we have an econ course at my institution where we thought that it needed more tutoring support, but what it turned out was that the students aren't taking their first test until after the add drop date. So they're not getting any feedback from the faculty.
Okay, so now let's look at some of the key issues, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so here's the challenge again. You've been asked to develop an academic support initiative to help a mid-sized four-year public college located in a large urban area address the problem with retention in its chem major, which is part of a larger institutional initiative. So we're looking at the key issues under retention, the student profile, and institutional challenges. Please take a moment to read the retention issues. Okay, next slide. And now the next slide.
And this is all information that you would gather through that background process, through those focus groups and talking with faculty and that sort of work.
Right. Now, if we were doing this session today as an hour and a half or 2-hour session, I would present you with a case study and you would have to pull this information out. But given the fact that we only have an hour, I think this is the best way to handle this. But what I want us to do now is we're going to go back to that first set of issues. What I'd like you to do individually is think about looking at these two bulleted issues. How what you think you might recommend in terms of a programmatic approach or an approach to help address this. So for example, you're looking at, okay, so the issue is affecting students that want to go up into med school. What does that mean in terms of a programmatic approach that you might recommend? Now, it's a little bit early to finalize that kind of a decision, but looking at the fact that these students are struggling with the prerequisite courses may give you some insight as to what you're recommending for those students. Colin?
Yeah, I love that thought. Co-requisites, bridge or boot camp. We have drop-in tutoring at my institution that's just math for chemistry, to give folks that opportunity to kind of remember how to do algebra. And we know mentoring and role modeling is valuable with first-gen students particularly.
Okay, let's move on to the next set of issues, which are the student profile. So is there anything that you're seeing here that may impact on your decision programmatically?
Flexible scheduling. Yeah. One thing that would be valuable for me is also making sure whatever program I'm developing, I want to make sure that I'm pulling from that surrounding community population as well, so that the students can see themselves reflected in the program as well.
Exactly. And what I was thinking particularly there is that if the students are working on and off campus, you want to hire as many of those students as you can back into the program, because they will be serving as not only the role models, but you'll be addressing the issue they have of having to leave campus to go for work. This way, if they're working on campus, they're more available to serve as, even if it's informal mentors and role models, they're available because they're on campus and they're working in the program. And so some of these, particularly like transportation, has nothing to do with the academic issue, but it can be a real drain on the students' time and availability to do their work. Okay, and then let's look at the next one, which is the administrative issues.
I would say the one thing that we haven't mentioned already is this idea of the reaccreditation. 16 months is not a lot of time to get a program off the ground running and get data that you can then use to support that.
And and it's not unrealistic for a senior staff or a college administrator to think that you can work miracles in 16 months. How many of you have faced that situation? So, addressing that via a small pilot project is a way of demonstrating the potential for an impact without making any guarantees, but showing that you're moving in the right direction, which is why I kind of threw that one in there for you to think about. But think about the impact of having part-time and adjunct faculty filling in the chem department as other people are retiring. What kind of an impact does that have on students attending office hours and the faculty being available for office hours when they have to leave one campus to go to another campus for their second part-time teaching gig? And how does that impact on students? Also, this is the second year of the college's neighborhood outreach initiative, which means there's fewer students available to serve as mentors and coaches because they're not successfully completing the program if it's only in its second year. And there's not that many students that have been successful, so there's fewer of those students available to serve as mentors. So that adds another challenge there. Okay, so you've got an idea about some of the things you want to do. Sean, let's take a look at the next slide. So we want to work on selecting the program and service model. Look at the existing resources wherever possible. You want to see who on your campus is already doing something that you can piggyback onto, or what you have been doing so far that you can just expand upon. You want to build your program based upon CRLA guidelines for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about those shortly. And while you're developing your training, you want to align it with level 1 CRLA certification. Even if you're not thinking of certification now, you might as well align yourself with certification requirements so that by the time you're ready for certification, you've already done all of the hard, heavy lifting and hard work. And then you want to develop, as I said a few minutes ago, a pilot program so that you can try some ideas out at a lower cost, at a smaller volume, and have an idea of what you want to do moving forward, keeping in mind that you're working against a time frame of only 16 months. So here you have several academic support program models for both tutoring and peer educator. So what I'd like you to do is just take a look at these and see which ones you might recommend for the scenarios as we've developed them thus far, and see if what you were thinking is on this list or if there's anything you'd like to see added to this list.
Yeah, I would say this list is not comprehensive, but it's a pretty good one.
The comprehensive would have taken about 3 slides worth, but I just wanted to give you some ideas, some things to think about. And next slide, Sean. Now let's take a look at different service models. So again, here, individually, choose the service models that might work for you. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but just some ideas to think about. And I've encountered many institutions that have mandatory tutoring for students that are at a certain grade point average, and some other institutions where students had to test in or out of tutoring or SI or coaching or mentoring. So think about what you might recommend in this particular scenario.
And I think that also depends on your philosophy of your program. So your program mission, your program goals. I've seen some programs, mine is, all voluntary, but I've also seen some programs where if you get below a C on the test, you have to go to at least 2 tutoring sessions before the next test.
Right.
Those sorts of things, depending on how things are set up.
And I just spoke to a faculty member at my institution who's redesigned his course so that one of the course meetings is going to be SI. And that way they can guarantee that all students are attending SI at least one time a week. Now, is this part of the standard SI model? No, but I thought it was pretty creative for the faculty members to get the point across to students that SI is really helpful. And we're going to show you that it's helpful because we're going to actually take time to do this during class. And we expect you then to continue with SI outside of class. So just think about what might work for you in this case study scenario. So now we're transitioning to what CRLA can do for you. So we're going to talk more about CRLA, and the current information is available for you at crla.net. Let's see if we can go to, we just want to show you because we're so proud of what we've done with CRLA's website and certification. But we've just revised the entire application, and all of the information for IT TPC is newly revised, current, and up to date, and super helpful, and much more condensed, and much more user friendly.
I would say that a couple of the things that folks haven't looked at as much as I'd hoped, we do have like a sample application on here that people can look at. We've updated the frequently asked questions. This standards, outcomes, and assessments document is about 114 pages. We spent a lot of time putting that together. I'm also going to put the link for that in the chat.
But this has been a project that has taken us literally 5 years to complete. It's way more in-depth and detailed than even we could imagine. And I'm currently working with the IPTPC team to do the same thing for peer educators side of the house. We're finished with the level 1 SOAs. We're working on the website now, and all of that will be updated before the end of the summer. And the reason that we're sharing that with you is if you are just looking for information, if you're looking for certification, if you're looking to change anything in your current program, begin to align it with CRLA standards, you've come in at a great time to do that. Okay, so when you have some time, do browse around and look at some of the changes we've made. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised and find it much easier to navigate, much easier to use, much more user-friendly and helpful and relevant to what your needs are, including a very extensive FAQ section. And Sean and his team did a really outstanding job on all of this. And I think you'll like it as much as we do. Well, let's go back to the slide presentation now. So as we said, this includes expanded standard outcomes and assessments, assessment ideas, an extensive table of contents and bibliography, a checklist for application. So even if you print off the checklist and begin to keep track of where you are towards your progress for certification and towards your progress for program development, you'll be way ahead of the game. Ideas from the reviewers. Sean worked with his reviewers very closely to have them generate things that they thought were important. Worksheets on starting a tutoring or peer educator program that I developed that complement but are not identical to what we're doing today in any way, and much, much more. And as I said, we're working on the IPTPC equivalent this summer. So as you transition from going, in this case, from the case study and the problem identification, we're now shifting gears and looking at how CRLA can help you develop the solution to these challenges. And CRLA has 4 critical criteria for training program certification. And the training program certification is really the core for CRLA certification. So CRLA certifies tutor or peer educator training programs, right? And that's really the crux of what the certification is about. And we don't certify tutors or peer educators, we certify your training program. And there's 4 key elements to that. There's how you go about selecting or hiring your tutors or peer educators, how you train your tutors or peer educators, how you track and validate the experience that they have working in an authentic environment with their tutees or coaching students or mentoring students, et cetera, and how you evaluate them. So these 4 criteria or 4 pillars are essential to what it is that we will then certify your program and the way that you train those individuals that are involved in your program. Okay, so let's take a look at each one of those 4 areas of what IPTPC calls the pillars. And when I say IPTPC is International Peer Educator Training Program Certification, and that includes the mentors, coaches, SI leaders, classroom leaders. It can even include resident assistants, RAs, or any other group that works with students around strategy development. Whereas tutors work, they include strategy development, but the focus of their work with students is really around content mastery or content proficiency. So the dividing line between tutoring ITTPC and peer educator IPTPC is one focuses on content development, the other focuses on strategy development, even though there's crossover in the 2 of them, if that makes any sense. So while IPTPC and ITTPC are similar, they're not identical. And the requirements are kind of grouped together, but they vary a little bit depending on which program you're talking about. So the requirements, as you can read, are slightly different for ITTPC or peer educator versus tutor. The requirements are listed in the top half of the slide. Additional considerations, you always want to make sure that when you're hiring or selecting people for these roles, that they reflect the diversity of the students on your campus. It's important to recognize that you're looking for individuals with potential, not perfection. You're not hiring or selecting tutors that already know how to do the job. You're selecting those people that meet the minimum grade point requirement, but they have the potential to learn how to do the job. We often make a mistake of looking to hire these mini-me's that know everything already. That's not who you want. You want people who are willing to learn, that have a capability to learn, that have the general characteristics of being compassionate, empathetic individuals who are willing to learn. Okay, and we always recommend that you have recommendations. We require recommendations for both roles and that you interview all candidates. It's important to also vet the applicants thoroughly to make sure that they're meeting all of the basic institutional benchmarks for academic, lack of a better word, acceptance. So I think it's important for you to really check and vet the students carefully, look for their, are they on academic warning, probation, or suspension? Do they have any outstanding honor code violations, and anything else that your institution considers important for academic success and overall success institutionally. Okay, next.
And
slide.
I'll say too, if you look at these requirements, it doesn't say anywhere here that the students have to have a certain, like they have to be A+ students across the board.
Mhm.
So you may choose a candidate who has learned from some mistakes, and that may make them the better candidate. That's okay. So just kind of getting you to think about the requirements is not holistic in terms of like they have to be perfect in absolutely everything.
Correct. Okay, next slide. The second area is the training. Okay, so we give you a lot of leeway in selecting topics for training that meet your own programmatic and institutional needs. But what we have found over the years, and many of you have come to us asking for some more guidance about what topics should you include. And we've also found that some institutions have their training topics sort of fit into only one particular category. So they've met the requirements of training, but all of the training topics sort of slanted towards one area or another. So what we've done is we've kind of broken the topics down into these 5 buckets or 5 topic areas, and we've set some requirements for topics that you must include in your training and given you many suggestions on topics that you can choose to include in your training, and also left the door open for you to create and select topics of your own at your own discretion that are not on our list. And we'll be taking a look at those in just a minute. For the purposes of the session today, though, we're looking at topics that would be appropriate for this case study. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is take a look at the topics that you would currently either you're using now in your real life training, or ones that you're using in this case study that you would recommend based upon what we've done so far. And you can compare that list in your head to the topics that we're using in CRLA level 1 training. And you want to focus in general on topics that are required and high need content. So for example, Sean, can you think of an example for this particular chemistry project?
Yeah,
What
so
would be a high need content area for this particular project?
I would say, you know, depending on which particular of those problems we've already discussed you wanted to focus on, something like working with specific populations is a CRLA topic that you can select, and you could gear that toward working with first generation students or working with you know, adult learners, or, you know, you could specify that based on the population that you were focusing on and have that count towards certification.
Okay. And as I said earlier, you want to take advantage of what is currently available at your campus. If you have a colleague that has a tutoring program, or if there's an excellent offering delivered by the chemistry department or in the math department on math for chemistry, it might be something like Shona mentioned earlier that you want to build into your training. And we can talk later about ways that you can use training that somebody else is delivering and still count that as CRLA training. We'll get into that later if time permits. Okay, so we're going to look now at, next slide, Sean. List your current and proposed training topics and ideas and sort those topics into these 5 buckets. And just take a moment to reflect on that. I don't think we have time for you to actually list them, but think about what would be basic, what would fit under communication, learning or study techniques, ethics and equity, and electives. And if you're currently running a program and you're looking to restart a program, think about what you're currently doing and how it fits into these topics. And if you're not at that point yet, think about what you would do in our scenario today. And we're just going to take about a minute or 2 for you to think about that. And if you've got pen and paper handy, you can jot that down. If not, just keep that in mind as we move through the rest of the slides. And I'm going to share with you what the current CRLA topics are for each of these 5 areas. It's broken down into 2 slides, so I'll leave them both up, each up for about a minute. So these are your level 1 topics. And as you can see under basics, you have to select at least 4, and there's only 4, which means all 4 of these are required. Under communication, there's only 2 that you must select, and there's 4 there. So you can choose the 2 that fit your program needs.
And if you find yourself wondering, what do they mean by tutoring conversations. That's where you're going to really dig into that standards and outcomes and assessments document I posted a couple of minutes ago, because that will define the standard that you'll need to meet for your tutors or your peer educators for that particular category. In the peer educator one, it says peer education conversations, but this is on the tutoring side.
Okay, let me move on to the next second half of this. And if you'll notice, some of these topics have little asterisks next to them. That means that if you are also responsible for training peer educators, that you can deliver the asterisk topics to both your tutors and your peer educators together concurrently during the same training session. Obviously, there'll be a point where those break out and you would have content specific to each group, but this is designed to save you time, save you mental energy, and also to create synergy between multiple groups of peer educators and tutors, because many of us are wearing multiple hats these days, and to have you have to repeat the training for multiple groups doesn't seem to make sense. And it also robs you of the opportunity to create that relationship between the multiple peer educators and tutors. Which topics might be appropriate for this particular scenario with the chem students and the pre-med major? Okay, Danielle, yep, the graphic organized can be very helpful for that content. Advanced study skills.
Oh yeah, professional ethics is a big one.
Mm-hmm. Question asking, exactly. Goal setting and planning. Active listening, right.
And your training sessions don't have to be called administrative policies, record keeping, and reporting for it to be that topic. You can have your own fancy name for things if you want.
Okay, so we're going to move on, but I think you all see the point here. And remember that this is just level 1. There's also level 2 and level 3 for CRLA certification. You don't need to use all 3. You don't need to apply for certification for all 3 levels. But if you're going to go beyond level 1, you need to maintain level 1 certification in order to apply for and pursue level 2. And you need to have level 1 and 2 certification if you're going to pursue level 3. Okay, so I think you guys have done a fantastic job with this part of this. All right, let's move on to the third area of certification, which is tracking authentic work with students.
For those of you who've been familiar with CRLA certification requirements in the past, this is actually something that we changed with the new system. So we are now requiring a minimum of 25 hours of direct service. That's across the board, regardless of your tutor or peer educator type. So we used to have special rules for drop-in centers, special rules for mentors who are also tutors, that sort of thing. We've just kind of equalized things across the board.
And also we're now, you can explain to us how you're tracking that rather than us telling you how to track it. As long as your explanation is clear and makes sense, that's fine with us. Okay, so now we've got a little, if you want to switch slides, a little fun activity. Which of the following count as experience towards a CRLA requirement?
Yeah, so it would be meeting with a student,
Mm-hmm.
not waiting for a student, meeting with a student on Zoom.
Yes. I
And
think,
then,
and 4.
and 4 could also be part of CRLA requirement, depending on if it's tutoring or peer education.
Right. So 2, 4, and 7 are the ones that I thought. I thought no, preparing a handout, no, because that's time spent prepping for a meeting with a student. Editing a student's essay, I would say no, because if you're working with the student on the essay, that's different than editing the student essay for them. So I think 2, 4, and 7 are the ones that I had in mind.
Yeah, and Colin's point is exactly what you had just said, Roberta. Like if they are working with a student to guide them through the process of editing their essay, then that is a session.
Right.
If they're just sitting there in their room and they're going like grammar error, spelling error, this is confusing, so on and so on, then it's not that interactive component, and it's just editing. It's being an editor, not a tutor, not a peer educator. Okay.
We'll talk about evaluation. So evaluation is the fourth area of CRLA certification, and you can read that on your own. These are what I consider the evaluation extras. And it's really important to remember that this, for many students, is their first real job besides babysitting or lifeguarding, right? And so you want to really treat this as a professional development opportunity for them, not something that's not punitive, something that can be a really enriching experience for them. And these are some tips about how to do that.
And one thing that we talk about a lot in training design is making sure that evaluation is not just assessment. Evaluation is about what you're going to do as a result of what has been seen or what has been tested. So we want you to be telling your tutors, hey, here's the feedback that we're getting, and let's work on what you're going to do with that information.
Okay, this is about developing a fiscal plan. So coming back to our scenario, you've kind of identified some ideas about what you want to propose as a pilot project for this challenge that you've been faced with. And you have to approach it with some kind of idea about budget, whether you've been told that this is how much money you have to spend, or whether you've been told how much money do you need to spend. You have to have some idea of what this is going to cost. And this is an area that many of us are not well versed in at all. So you need to figure out how much is this going to cost you? And there's a lot of different things to focus on. We could spend a whole hour, 2 hours talking about that. I put in the chat some information about 6 different types of budget models for colleges and universities, and it's an easy to read, easy to digest. It's already, I think it was already in there. Did I not send it? No, I didn't. Easy to digest article that explains different types of fiscal planning and budgeting that I would highly recommend that you read. You want to have a realistic startup budget. And again, this is another reason why a pilot project is a good idea, because you're asking the institution to invest a small amount of money as opposed to a large amount of money for something that may or may not work, right? So find out what might be available to you, find out what kind of resources you have. We've only looked at a very small piece of the program. We've looked at what kind of human resources you might need in terms of hiring your students. But there's many, many other areas to think about. There's your physical plant, there's your supplies and materials, there's your staff that are not your tutoring or peer educator staff, but there's who's going to run your front desk, what kinds of technology you need, do you need any software, do you need any hardware, a whole bunch of other things. If we had more time, I would have liked you to kind of discuss this, but we don't have the time today, so I want to stop here. But please do take an opportunity to read through this article. I think you'll find it interesting information, and begin to talk to those people at your institution that have more information about budgeting. If you're not responsible for budgeting for your own program, find out how that's figured out. It's great information for you to have. It's really, really helpful. And this has to do with, again, if we had more time, if this was an hour and a half, we would be able to talk about this. But again, this is more things that you need to think about in terms of how might you involve faculty in your pilot project, how might you determine what hours and what days you need to be open. And think back to the fact that we had a lot of adjunct faculty that are not around in the afternoons and evenings, that you had a lot of students that are living off campus and working part-time jobs on and off campus, and what other kind of staffing, as I just mentioned, what other kind of staffing do you need for this pilot project? And go back to, how do you know that this is going to be successful? What kinds of assessments are you going to use to measure your program's success? And Sean, if you would move to the next slide. You want to build assessment in at every step, right? You want to look at formative and summative assessments. You want to document your usage patterns. Are people coming in? Are they coming in on mornings? Are they coming in on weekends? Are they using the service during the evenings? You want to look for trends, and you want to share those trends with the person or senior staff team that gave you the original challenge. And this is, again, where the SOAs can help you a lot in terms of assessing the short-term work of your peer educators and tutors, and also looking at some of the longer term assessment strategies that you're going to use programmatically.
I think one of the questions that I saw in the chat was about, can you assess your students as well? And that can certainly be a way of assessing your program effectiveness. And it's definitely not a bad idea to figure out what's your assessment strategy for that particular question. Are you going to do a cohort analysis? Are you going to work with your Office of Institutional Research to do some, peer-to-peer peer-to-peer comparisons? Are you going to do grade analysis? Those sorts of things are definitely things to think about as part of the assessment initiative that you build into your program.
Right. And one thing to think about is you might not be able to tie students coming for tutoring, for example, to their grade improvement. But even if the tutoring can help improve the student's attitude, that will in turn help improve their persistence and give them more time on task for their homework or class participation. So it's a cascading kind of effect. And so looking at the students or tutees' attitude and perception of the value of tutoring can be just as important an assessment as ultimately their grade change, if that makes any sense. Okay, the confidence, yep, we asked tutees to give feedback after the session. So there's a lot of little assessments that you can do along the way that can be really helpful, along with the larger scale institutional assessments. Okay, so we're just out of time now. Sean and I will be happy to hang around a few more minutes if people want to stay and ask any other questions. I want to thank you for participating today. I hope you got something valuable out of this.
And I'm just going to put up, this is a great takeaway list of the steps that Roberta talked about today. So identifying the problems, communicating with stakeholders, just putting this up for folks that want to compare that with the notes that you've been taking today. And then I also want to make sure we share this last slide. If you're looking for more ways to connect, I'm also going to put in here my email address. If you have questions about tutoring, I'll put it in the chat. I'm usually pretty up on my emails and responding. If you want to do some really intense work with training development, I also encourage you to consider the Summer Institute. We will be doing it next summer. We didn't do it this year, obviously, because of COVID, but it is a 3-day intensive training development institute. And it's only 40 people for each training group, so it's a pretty small group.
And we're running 2 sessions for the tutor training at the Summer Institute and 1 for the peer educator training. So you've got some choices of days. We only have about 40 people for each session, so it fills very quickly, but what that means is it's a nice small group, as Sean said, and you get a lot of individualized attention and a chance to develop a network of peers that you can work with long after the Summer Institute is over.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, but folks can stay on if you have specific questions you want to reach out to us.